You may feel that today's obscenely rich, Jeff Bezos, the Bill Gates and Warren Buffetts of the world, have fortunes so vast that they could never be topped. Well, relatively speaking, the contemporary versions of the world's wealthiest pale in comparison to some of the past, and by a wide marginable to put together a list of the top 10 wealthiest individuals of all time. One important thing to note is that there are likely figures missing, as numbers do tend to get lost or disappear as time goes on. There are likely many historical figures, like Genghis Khan, King Solomon, numerous Roman emperors, Egyptian pharaohs and popes, who have controlled huge fortunes, yet there is no real way to put a dollar figure on those fortunes. As for those individuals that we can get solid wealth information on, watch on to see the top 10. Number 10. Mr. Osman Ali Khan. Net worth $236 billion. You may never have heard of Mir Osman Ali Khan, but he was without a doubt one of the wealthiest people the world has ever known. As ruler of the Hyderabad state in India, he was the last Nizam, or ruler, of the princely state of Hyderabad and of Berar. Ruled Hyderabad between 1911 and 1948, until it was merged into India. He was styled His Exalted Highness the Nizam of Hyderabad. During his days as Nizam, he was reputed to be the richest man in the world, having a fortune estimated at $2 billion in the early 1940s, $32.8 billion in today's dollars, or 2% of the US economy then. At that time, the Treasury of the newly independent Union Government of India reported annual revenue of $1 billion only. His wealth include a vast private treasury. Its coffers were set to contain £100 million in gold and silver bullion, and a further £400 million of jewels. Among them was the fabulously rare Jacob diamond, valued at some £100 million, 2008, and used by the Nizam as a paperweight. Calculating his modern-day worth by accounting for inflation, the Nizam was worth $236 billion, making him one of the wealthiest people to have ever lived. Number 9. Nikolai Alexandrovich Romanov. Net worth $300 billion. Known as Tsar Nicholas II, Nikolai Alexandrovich Romanov amassed $300 billion worth of wealth. Nicholas II is probably most famous for being the last emperor of Russia before the country fell during the Russian Revolution. Notably, Nicholas II became a saint recognized by the Russian Orthodox Church, and is known as the wealthiest saint in human history. Born in 1868 as Nikolai Alexandrovich into the House of Romanov, was the emperor of the Russian Empire from 1894 until the February Revolution of 1917. Around age 48, in 1916, his wealth was valued at up to $881 million, which equals $290 billion in today's money. He is seen as the wealthiest monarch and head of state in history, and further as the wealthiest saint, as the Russian Orthodox Church declared him. His wife and his children martyrs after being murdered in 1918 by the Bolsheviks. At the time of his death, his net worth was $900 million, which is the inflation-adjusted equivalent to $300 billion in today's dollars, thus making him one of the richest people in human history. Number 8. John D. Rockefeller. Net worth $341 billion. The Rockefeller name is deeply ingrained in American history, and John D. Rockefeller's $341 billion fortune still stands today as nearly the largest the world has ever seen. Born in 1839 in New York, he grew to prominence over his lifetime as the co-founder of Standard Oil. He began investing in the petroleum industry in 1863, and by 1880 his Standard Oil Company controlled 90% of American oil production. As one of the revolutionaries of the energy and petroleum industries, Rockefeller is also well known for his philanthropy, founding two colleges during his lifetime, the University of Chicago and Rockefeller University. According to his New York Times obituary, Rockefeller was valued at about $1.5 billion. His wealth was equivalent to $341 billion in 2014. John D. Rockefeller lived between 1839 and 1937. He died in 1937 at the age of 97. Number 7. Andrew Carnegie. Net worth $372 billion. Andrew Carnegie, an incredibly wealthy and powerful industrialist, came to prominence during the mid-1800s by way of the steel industry. Having been born in Scotland, Carnegie came from a very poor family that entered the United States in the late 1840s. After successfully investing in a number of ventures, Carnegie founded the U.S. Steel Corporation, which earned him most of his $372 billion fortune. He is also known for giving away almost all of it, and is remembered as one of the world's foremost philanthropists. Rockefeller gets all the press, but Andrew Carnegie may be the richest American of all time. The Scottish immigrant sold his company, U.S. Steel, to J.P. Morgan for $480 million in 1901. That sum equates to about slightly over 2.1% of U.S. GDP at the time, giving Carnegie economic power equivalent to $372 billion in 2019. Number 6. Mansa Musa of Mali. Net worth $415 billion. Mansa Musa, the king of Timbuktu, is often referred to as the wealthiest person in history. According to Durham College history professor Richard Smith, Musa's West African kingdom was likely the largest producer of gold in the world, at a time which gold was in especially high demand. Some tales of his famous pilgrimage to Mecca, during which Musa's spending was so lavish that it caused a currency crisis in Egypt, mention dozens of camels each carrying hundreds of pounds of gold. Smith says 1 year of Malian gold production probably generated about a ton. Others said Musa's army consisted of 200,000 men, including 40,000 archers. Troop numbers even modern superpowers would have a difficult time bringing to the field. But to get caught up in the king's exact wealth is to miss the point. As Rudolph Ware, an associate professor of history at the University of Michigan, explains, Musa's riches were so immense that people struggled to describe them. Number 5. King Solomon of Israel. Net worth $2 trillion. The Bible states that King Solomon held a fortune that dwarfed any and every person who lived before him. This made him the richest person ever lived in the world. King Solomon reigned for 40 years. Each year, he received 25 tons of gold. 1 ton of gold is worth $64.3 million at $2000/Oz. Therefore, 25 ton times 40 years of his reign amounts to $64,300,800,000. This did not include income derived from business, trade, nor the annual tribute paid to him by all of the kings and governors of Arabia. Gold in the palace. King Solomon's throne was coated in pure gold and inlaid with ivory. It had 6 stairs, 12 lion statues, 1 on either side of each step, and a solid gold footstool. 2 larger lion statues stood on either side of the throne. All of the goblets and household articles in Solomon's palace were pure gold. He was reportedly so rich, that during the years of his reign over Jerusalem, the immense wealth caused silver to be considered of little value and as common as rocks. As such, nothing in Solomon's palace was made of silver. Number 4. Augustus Caesar. Net worth $4.63 trillion. Augustus was the first Roman emperor, reigning from 27 BC until his death in AD 14. He was the first ruler of the Julio-Claudian dynasty. His status as the founder of the Roman Principate has consolidated an enduring legacy as one of the most effective and controversial leaders in human history. Not only was Augustus Caesar in charge of an empire that accounted for 25% to 30% of the world's economic output, but according to Stanford history professor Ian Morris, Augustus at one point held personal wealth equivalent to 1/5 of his empire's economy. That fortune would be the equivalent of about $4.6 trillion in 2019. For a while, Morris adds, Augustus personally owned all of Egypt. That's hard to top. Number 3. Akbar I. Net worth $21 trillion. The greatest emperor of India's Mughal dynasty, Akbar controlled an empire that accounted for about 1/4 of global economic output. Fortune's Chris Matthews cites the late economic historian Angus Maddison, who speculates India's GDP per capita under Akbar was comparable to Elizabethan England, but with a ruling class whose extravagant lifestyle surpassed that of the European society. That assertion that India's elite class was wealthier than their counterparts to the West is backed up by data from economist Branko Milanovic, whose research shows the Mughal dynasty was one of the most effective empires of all time at extracting wealth from the population. Renowned for his lavish lifestyle and patronage of the arts, this emperor conquered hundreds of thousands of square miles of territory and ruled over much of the Indian subcontinent, known as the Mughal Empire from 1556 until 1605. He controlled around 25% of the world's GDP at the time, which would translate to a staggering $21 trillion today. Number 2. Emperor Shenzong of Song. Net worth $30 trillion. China's Song dynasty, 960 to 1279, was one of the most economically powerful empires of all time. According to Professor Ronald A. Edwards, a Chinese economic historian of the Song dynasty at Tamkang University, the nation accounted for between 25% and 30% of the world's economic output during its peak. The empire's wealth came from both its technological innovations and extreme skill at tax collection, which Edwards says was hundreds of years ahead of European governments. The professor also noted the Song dynasty's government was highly centralized, meaning the emperor held enormous control over the economy. Shenzong ruled China from 1067 to 1085 during the peaceful prosperity and primary abundance eras when he controlled around 30% of global GDP, the equivalent of $30+ trillion today. Adept at collecting taxes, the emperor's administration wasn't all take, however. Its famous new policies, which helped improve the lives of the poor, are seen as a forerunner of the modern welfare state. And for the richest man in the history of mankind. Guess who that is? Genghis Khan. Net worth $100 trillion. The fearsome Mongol leader conquered a mind-blowing 12 million square miles of land between 1206 and his death in 1227, more than anyone else in history. But while his hordes pillaged their way through huge swathes of Eurasia, the combined continental landmass of Europe and Asia, territory that is now worth trillions of dollars, Khan didn't actually hoard his spoils, choosing to redistribute the stolen loot and territory among his subjects instead. Genghis Khan is undoubtedly one of the most successful military leaders of all time. As leader of the Mongol Empire, which at its height stretched from China to Europe, he controlled the largest contiguous empire in history. However, despite his great power, scholars say Genghis never hoarded his wealth. On the contrary, the Khan's generosity was key to his influence. Genghis still received a share of the spoils, but that hardly made him rich. He built no palace for himself or family, no temple, no tomb, and not even a house, says Weatherford. He was born in a Walgur yurt, and he died in a Walgur. At death he was wrapped in felt, like any common person, and then buried. Thanks for watching. Like, share and comment down below. Yes or no? If the video was amazing and informative,